Welcome to Applying Remote Sensing session. My name is Haiyin Cao. I am Assistant Professor in Soil Fertility and Residue Management at Washington State University. I am your moderator for this session. Before we start our session, I'd like to highlight a few housekeeping items. We welcome you all to submit questions at any time during the presentation. Please submit your questions in the chat window in the Zoom. I will read the questions to the presenters after their presentations. If we won't be able to answer all the questions within the time frame of this session, you will receive the answers for the unanswered questions in the email after this conference. If you wish to submit your questions in the Whova QA session, your questions will be collected and answered after the session. CEO credits are available, and the QR code will be displayed at the last few minutes of this session. Please scan the QR code using your mobile device to receive the CEO credits. And just a reminder that this session will be recorded. Our first presenter will be Dr. Jimmy Solman, followed by Dr. Phillip Owens, followed by Dr. Dorn Cox. Dr. Soman received his PhD in interdisciplinary material science at the Vanderbilt University. Dr. Soman is currently the CEO and co-founder of the EarthSense INC. At EarthSense, Dr. Soman leads the creation of robotics and machine learning platform for transforming agricultural productivity and sustainability with the use of state-of-the-art robotics. Dr. Owens received his PhD in the soil science from Texas A&M University. Dr. Owens is currently the research leader and research soil scientist with the USDA ARS in Arkansas. Dr. Owens received research interests include soil and landscape processes, hydropodology, as well as digital soil mapping related to land use management. Dr. Cox received his PhD from the University of New Hampshire in natural resources and earth system science. Dr. Cox serves as research director and project lead for Open Team. He is a co-founder of the Farm OS software platform, the GOAT, the Farm Hack community, and founding board member of the New England Farmers Union. In addition, Dr. Cox manages his diversified family farm with his wife, Sarah, in New Hampshire. In 2018, his work was recognized with inaugural Hugh Hammond Burnett Award for Excellence in Conservation, given by the National Association of Conservation Districts. And in 2019, Dr. Cox was awarded the Foodshot Global Groundbreaker Prize. Our first presenter is Dr. Soman. Dr. Soman, please share your screen and take it over.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Tao. Let's see, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, it's great to be here. I've kind of unfortunately only been able to dip in and out of the session so far, but what I've heard has been amazing. Really excited to binge watch all the sessions that I missed over the next few days. But I think, we're all gathering around this very, very important topic of soil health, soil regeneration, and sustainable or regenerative, really, soil management. Given the topic of the panel about remote sensing for soil health, I'm kind of going to take the opposite approach and play it a little bit of a devil's advocate and say that remote sensing is potentially a really interesting solution, but I'm going to make the case for applying more proximal sensing solutions. both from understanding soil, of course, and then how they interact with managing our soils better. To add a little bit to my background and sort of the approach we take at EarthSense. My PhD was in bionanomaterials and bioinformatics, applied mostly to human health. But I did most of my work in agriculture right after my PhD, starting with working on the ground with rural organizations and farmers in India, as well as several rural development and agricultural organizations in the US. And this was mostly motivated by the fact that I saw agricultural sustainability and agricultural, farmer profitability being hurt as I was finishing up my PhD research. That led to NSF postdoctoral fellowship, where I applied the bioinformatics approach to soil health. So essentially looking at new ways of studying soil microbiome functionality, and how management practices affect soil microbes and their ability to improve the agricultural ecosystem. My co-founder, on the other hand, actually has a background in aerospace. So he's the person that brings the technology and remote sensing and robotics and AI capabilities. And he's also the professor of agricultural engineering as well as computer science here at the University of Illinois. And as some of you might know, University of Illinois was recently awarded the USDA National AI Institutes grant that was last fall. And he leads the Autonomous Farming Trust there. So we kind of come at agriculture from this perspective of, really wanting to integrate a deep understanding of biology in a holistic sort of ecosystem-driven manner with creating new technologies for agriculture. And just to kind of quickly walk through what we see EarthSense, how we see EarthSense benefiting agricultural sustainability. We've started with field phenotyping and crop breeding support, essentially, to help make better seeds faster and at lower costs, with a special focus on the more underserved areas of the world. So Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, where crop yields are much lower, in large parts because the seeds are not well adapted and targeted towards those areas. Then, of course, there's things that we plan to do that help farmers manage their farms with fewer chemicals, as well as diversify their ecosystems. We are here in the Midwest, where it's 200 million acres of just corn and soybean, and we'd prefer to move that to a more diverse agricultural system. And that really leads to the regenerative agriculture ethos that's at the base of EarthSense, but also the final objective. Essentially, our current approach is just dealing with data. So with these small robots, we are providing unique under canopy insights to crop scientists, agronomists, as well as farmers. But over the longer run, we expect to start making technologies that make regenerative farming much more practical. And I don't need to kind of rehash this, but this is kind of the prototypical US European agriculture, right? Large scale machinery that's managing vast landscapes, but it's leading to all of these major problems. So it's kind of a long way of introduction, but basically, our approach to soils is understanding soils is, of course, extremely important. But right now, there is no good solution to doing that. So, of course, soil sampling and sort of lab testing costs, around $2 to $4 per year, and then you're generally doing it only every so often. Aerial imagery, we've done a very deep dive on all the capabilities that are currently out there. Essentially, it doesn't really work very well, especially because it's only typically looking at the top layer of the soil, or really the top surface of the soil. Thermal imagery potentially, to me, has the most interesting properties. It can tell us a lot about organic matter in soils, but there's so many confounding factors, like the mineral composition of the soil, terrain, drainage, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, sort of, from my background, microbiomes are definitely one of the most important things to know about soils, especially as we think about nutrient cycling, carbon sequestration, things like that. But the technologies for doing that, as well as our understanding of what microbiomes actually mean for soil health, we're still in early days. Essentially, our thinking is that we need more automation in soil testing, soil measurement, but basically automated soil sampling hasn't solved the problem. There's a bunch of these automated soil core pullers that are out there, but the bottleneck seems to be still A, the cost of those equipment, and B, the cost of actually doing the testing in the lab. There's basically a need for doing soil testing, especially at depth, on site, on the field. And to us, that means that we need better robotics and better sensors. And then one of the things that we are continually pushing is, we should just watch the plants, and they can tell us what's going on in the soil. So that's kind of the platform that we've developed. This small, low cost, easy to use robot, that can work together in teams, work basically around the clock in the field, collecting data. And I'm going to kind of skip around here a little bit. But it's using a number of different modes of autonomy. So GPS, Lidar, vision, all of these kinds of technologies to make sure that it works autonomously in a variety of different kinds of fields with modifications possible. And already it's a very rugged platform that is capable of handling a number of different challenging conditions. We've had almost 50 of these robots were deployed last year all across the US, several overseas as well. And then really the key factor for us is this under canopy information, right? So things that are not visible from the air, but are extremely easy to work with once you have this under canopy information. So things like stem diameter, but more to our point, let me see if I can backtrack there. You can start seeing, leaves that are discoloring. So, this is actually a SNS leaf, but we've also seen very clear signal from, leaf firing and things like that, that can very easily tell us what's going on with soil nutrient cycling. And that opens up a whole new area of looking at soil health, assessing soil health based on this, simple, I say quote unquote simple, visual and LiDAR based sensing that's being processed with augmented or largely data-driven algorithms, AI algorithms. And then finally, when we work with the seed breeders, we usually take this to plot by plot data analysis. And then, the core platform that we've developed is applicable to a number of these different, potential application areas, such as controlling weeds, for example. So that's just a, quick idea to give you guys a quick idea of the core platform so far. Longer term, we see the applications in, of course, scouting, but also precision treatment. Cover cropping is a major initiative and interest at EarthSense, and then of course weed management and other kinds of tasks on the field. Let's see, to kind of quickly give a view of where this is going. Essentially, like self-driving cars, these robots are not, quote unquote, fully autonomous. If somebody tells you that they have fully autonomous robots, don't believe them. We'll get there, but it's going to take a few more years. And then the other part in agriculture, of course, is you have to bring down the cost. So that's kind of the philosophy that we followed. We started with very, very early stage technology that was funded by the Department of Energy and by USDA. Developed some of the early part in at the University of Illinois, and then brought it over to EarthSense to start doing more interesting things, more sort of problem solving for specific problems at EarthSense. We're starting to create the next generation of robots as well. And that's one of the sort of questions I would like to kind of throw to the community to say, okay, what are the most important problems we want to solve with this? Because we take this like platform approach to creating this platform. So Dorn will speak more about the OS side of things, but from our side, we are kind of creating the robotics and AI platform for solving significant problems. I'll kind of flip through this pretty quickly. And then, in addition to working with private companies as well as many, many universities, we're starting to form all of these interesting partnerships with, USDA, with John Deere and other companies. I'll leave you with this one last video. Basically, even though the robot seems nice and tiny and cute, it's kind of a powerful little beast. So I'd love to hear from you all, what you think the robots could do, and robots and AI could do to help improve agricultural sustainability, soil health, soil management, all of those different things. So some of our engineers were a little mad that people weren't taking the robot seriously, so they kind of went a little nuts and did this demo video of stress testing the robot. But yeah, that's basically our approach. Soil health is one of the most challenging and important things for us to tackle. We are taking an approach of looking at the soil from up close, and we've engineered the platform to be quite modular. So what is it that we can help measure on the ground from up close with these robots? Thank you.
Great presentation, Dr. Soman's really nice, cute video. And we are going to save the questions to the last. So our next presentation will be by Dr. Owens. Please take it over.
Okay. Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As I was introduced, I'm Phillip Owens. I'm the research leader at the Dale Bumper Small Farms Research Center in Booneville, Arkansas. And our mission is to find economic solutions for smallholder farmers while maintaining and improving water quality. And when I started this position about 5 years ago, thinking about the problem and the mission that we have to support small farmers, it to me was pretty obvious that technology would be one of the solutions that we can utilize to help smallholder farmers. And so we've invested quite a bit into that, and that's our direction, and that's one of our focuses. And I think, as you all saw from the previous slide from Dr. Chinmay, the technology is coming super fast, and it's a challenge to keep up with. But I feel like that's the role of scientists, is to understand the technology and try applications of the technology to distill the technology into where it can be used over through lots of people, and basically democratizing the technology so that it's useful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about proximal sensing and remote sensing for improved soil health. And I want to recognize one of the co-authors on the research, Dr. Amanda Ashworth. We work very closely together. A lot of the research you'll see in this presentation is through both of our teams working together, and wanted to make sure that she's recognized for the work that she's contributed to this project. So we'll start out with, I'm going to show you one example of one of our research sites. It's an agroforestry site. I've heard several talks about agroforestry in silvopasture is another tool for diversification. And this site is near Fayetteville. It's a small site. It's about 11.5 acres. And what I'm showing here is the USDA soil survey map. It has 4 different mapping units on it. And it shows that there's 2 well-drained, 1 moderately well-drained, and 1 somewhat poorly drained soil on this site. And you can see the rows of trees on the bottom. There's pecans, we have some sycamore, poplar, and oak, and we have forages growing between the rows that we graze and manage. And so the soil survey is one of the best resources of soil in the world. It's got continuous coverage over the United States. And one thing I would like to show is how proximal and remote sensing can be utilized to refine this resource so that we can better understand that for management for soil health. One of the tools that we use all the time is the digital elevation model developed from Lidar. So we have 1 meter Lidar throughout most of Arkansas. Most of your states has Lidar. And we have 1 meter, which is really too resolved for our needs. So we usually downsample that to 3 meter resolutions, which means every 3 meter square on that field has a unique individual number for elevation. And so we take those elevation values and run some mathematics on it, some algorithms to understand what that information is telling us. And I always relate it to how water is redistributed and accumulates or sheds within the landscape, because water is really driving the system. It's driving the biologic system, as well as the historic water redistribution over time helps us understand how soil properties vary across the field. And so you can see some examples of the terrain algorithms, this flow accumulation, multi-resolution valley bottom flatness, Saga wetness index. So these are all giving me information about how water may be redistributed within the field. If you look at, this is basically some interpolation of about 51 samples that we collected in a grid across the field. The nitrous, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur. You see that these elements are not evenly distributed. They're higher and lower in different spots. And if you think back to that, those terrain algorithms that we ran on the previous slide, you can start seeing some of the patterns that we see. And so same with the micronutrients, very similar pattern. And that a diagonal that goes through the center of the field is a low area. And so this area accumulates water, whereas the slopes and the hilltops are shedding water. And so if you applied nutrients on the field or applied anything on the field, it's going to be redistributed based off of the intensity of the elevation difference across that field. And this is one of the projects. As I was developing this research, Dr. Ashworth looked at our soil maps, and as part of their grazing study, they put GPS collars on the cows. So you can see in the upper left corner, a cow standing there with the GPS collars on them. And every time the cow would bend down to take a bite, it assesses the angle of the cow and takes a GPS coordinate. So if you look at the green dots there on the one side of the screen, you see every dot represents when a cow has its head down grazing. It's really interesting looking at the soil map, which is soil map of depth, and also really indicates some of the drainage class. So the blues would be wet, the reds would be well drained. Look at the pattern of how the animals are grazing. They're continuing this work to look at the forage quality, assuming that the animals are choosing where they graze for a particular reason. We're trying to understand that a little bit better based off of these data. We're also using some proximal sensing technique, using EM meters across the field. You can see our setup here. We have the side-by-side with the meter being drugged behind, and it sends a pulse on one end of the meter and receives the pulse on the other side of the meter. And that pulse intensity is related to basically the salt content or electrical conductivity of the soil. And here we're doing this on time series. So you can see each one of the little individual dots is an individual reading as we're pulling it across the field. And so we can go over this 11 acres in about an hour and a half to 2 hours and get a complete survey of the field. And when we get a survey, we get the electrical conductivity at a half meter and about 1.5 meters. Again, as you saw with the terrain attributes based off the digital elevation model, as you saw from the cattle grazing, as you saw from the soil map, we're getting very similar patterns with the electrical conductivity across the field at different time series. So this is at the half meter EC. And then if we look at the 1.5 meters, the signal is still there. And it really is related to the combination of water and what salts are contributing to the conductance of the soil. We also use ground penetrating radar. Here's our group setting up. So this one we pull by hand, not by machine. So one of my graduate students, Minerva Durantes, pulling the ground penetrating radar with the help of the Richard Vaught with the USDA NRCS in Little Rock. So this is the setup, and we're pulling it across the field. And what it does is it shoots a radar signal into the soil and measures the reflections of that radar back into the receiver. And you can see we're looking at some of the amplitudes and really dissecting these radar pulses to try to understand what's going on below ground. It's fairly uniform soils in the upper 50 centimeters, and then we start getting either you can detect water or rocks or other root penetrating layers, which is really helpful for us to understand the water holding capacity of the soil and how that soil may respond or function. Here's a close-up of a soil. You can see the coarse fragments starting at about 40, 50 centimeters, and you can see the radar reflections from that. This soil was wet when we sampled it, so these patterns are indicating that there was a water table in the soil. We had to pump this pit out, and where the water was about 50 centimeters when we sampled it. So we're excavating as well to try to relate the signals to what we see below ground. One thing that's very obvious to us as well is the tree growth was different when you cross that low drainage area. So this is a photo showing the tree heights. And so since these trees have been planted in the 90s, we've been collecting data. So we have DBH and other metrics that we have collected over each year from the trees. So by visually seeing the trees, we wanted to quantify that difference in tree growth. One thing that we saw is that each species grew at different rates, not surprising. That's just a function of that individual tree. The oak, pecan, cottonwood, sycamore, you can see the absolute growth rate in the left graph with the arrow bars showing the growth rates. But one thing that is really interesting to us and I think helps with management is if you look at the oak and you look at this Saga Wetness Index, which the Saga Wetness Index is telling us where water is accumulating. So it's negatively correlated on the oak to the wetness index. So which tells us the wetter the soil is, the less happy the oak is and the less it grows. Same with the multi-resolution valley bottom flatness. Again, that's showing us an indication of where the water is accumulating. So the oaks do not like the wet feet. the vertical distance from the channel, which is telling me that the areas that are highest in the landscape is positively correlated to the landscape. So higher the ground, the better the oak liked it, the faster it grew. If you look at the cottonwood, kind of the reverse, it was positively correlated to the wet areas. So it really liked the extra water, grew much faster, same with the valley bottom flatness, and then was about equal with the vertical distance of channel network. So for me, that's thinking like an ecologist. You put the plants where they grow the best and you get the most benefit from it and the least amount of management. But again, the wetness index is an easily accessible, remotely sensed product that I think has a lot of value, especially for management. And one of the things that we like to do is think about these functional zones. Where are the soil populations the same? So if you're going to manage, you need to manage a population to get the similar response. So from that, those topographical terrain attributes and some soil properties, we have some maps like functional zone A. If you utilize a management and your target is to improve organic matter, you could apply that particular management practice to zone A, zone B, zone C. Each management zone should have a particular management practice to achieve your target goal to improve your soil health. And you don't really need to be super sophisticated, I think, to do this, because it's, to me, it's pretty basic understanding of your farms and your fields. If you want to manage based off topography, you know where your low spots are, your hill slopes and your hilltops. You manage those separately or sample them separately for sure, because they're going to be different populations of soils that should be managed differently. Because really, to me, water is driving the biologic system. You follow the water, you can understand the biology. We oftentimes think of nutrients as a law limiting, but water can be limiting as well. You can have the best fertilized soil. Without the water, you don't get the uptake, you don't get the growth, you don't get the response. And so think about water. And I feel like that proximal and remote sensing has a bright future in helping us understand the system better. And with that, I'll end with the conclusions. We found that the properties vary within the field based off topography, which is driven by water. It's water over time that really drives the differentiation within the system. But the functions are due to the combination of topography and soil differences. We found that plants and animals respond to these differences that we see in soils and water. Proximal sensing and remote sensing are I think are going to be great tools for the futures that help us understand the relationships and responses. And I think really thinking about your soil health related to your local environment of these different functional units within your field will help you make progress towards your end goals of improving soil health.
Thank you, Dr. Owen, for excellent example showing us how to use publicly available tools and technology, as well as sensors to help us with soil health work. And so we are going to start our next presentation by Dr. Cox. Please take it away. And also for the audience, please keep submitting your questions. Thank you very much for doing so. Take it over.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate being on this panel and following these great presentations, because I think they highlight some of the reason for being for Open Team, which I'll be talking mostly about. Again, my name is Dorn Cox. I'm Research Director at Wolf's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment, an educational and research nonprofit just north of Portland, Maine. But I'm here to talk about Open Team, or Open Technology Ecosystem for Agricultural Management, which is really addressing some of the challenges we have in terms of the range of questions that we're asking around soil health, from understanding it from the microbiome to the biosphere, and all of the different demands now on agriculture in terms of quantifying that and making decisions. And really recognizing that, again, as a large-scale systems science, multi-generational endeavor that we're engaged in, that it requires some new ways in which we can place our tools into context to make better decisions. So again, it's a collaborative effort led by recognizing that, again, as a technology ecosystem is necessary to bridge those boundaries and ask those broader questions together. And it's beyond the scope of just at the field level. And it really requires, again, this larger sense of a shared public science. And so our membership really is quite diverse to represent the different stakeholders within telling this new data-driven story about how our soils function at the agronomic level for marketplace incentives, and then also just to further our understanding of how the system functions in general, how the world works. And so our members are more than 30 and growing, represent farm and ranch networks and large scale and small scale food companies, government agencies, technology providers, ecosystem marketplaces, researchers, as well as farm organizations that represent diverse production systems and geographies. And we're supported with matching funding from the Foundation for Food and Agriculture research to bring this collaborative together in a pre-competitive way. So foundational to this is really getting, I think echoes some of the earlier comments too, is that it's about democratizing access to agricultural knowledge. As we move from a model of precision and high input agriculture into biological agriculture, the understanding of those complex systems becomes more of the limiting factor. So I'd say we're moving towards a knowledge limited system and perhaps a resource limited. And then that requires tools to empower land stewardship. And that can be true, as we saw with some of the earlier presentations, in terms of data to drive automation, but also ultimately the decisions that, say, a robot is making, some of that same logic can also be human interpretable. So that same decision-making process, again, made human interpretable across landscapes, across production systems, is one of our common opportunities and challenges. And, you know, as we've seen, there's certainly tremendous proliferation of tools and technologies, but often they've been developed in isolation. So in order to get the best of IoT and Internet of Things and remote sensing and agroecosystem models and robotics and AI, all of those things really do better in context. And so that's really what we're doing, is starting to build an ecosystem by which they can be trusted and provide an opportunity to hand off across scales, geographies, and cultures. And so what that looks like, really, again, the focus on management, taking these all available tools, translating that into an actionable applied science, which is really adaptive management at the ground level. This is what soil health management is observing, you have some practices and principles, you observe the outcomes, and then you adapt. And so if we can bring that toolkit together, that's really what Open Team is about. So we've started with a host of observation tools at the field level to help gather and mix both environmental direct measurement with management records, because that's really the key to help calibrate and validate everything from remote sensing and image analysis to improving the quality, creating rich data sets to help calibrate and improve the quality of our agroecosystem models that describe to better understand and predict especially more diverse regenerative agricultural practices. So we need the data to help drive some of these models. And then ultimately to take those tools, those models and landscape level analysis, and be able to translate that into context that's human readable in decision tools. Again, moving towards that decision agriculture. So be that grazing management decision tools, cover crop decisions, or other soil health management planning tools. And a core here, and I think this is key to my understanding of the challenge of soil health science, is that we're both dealing with sort of a global system, but also local application of that. So it all, again, has to work at the ground level, and that means that it has to work for producers. We have to, again, make the site-specific decision support accessible. And if we can do that, it turns out that that data, if we can enter that data once well at the field level, that same data can be used and reused many times, because high quality, high resolution data at the field level is what you need for good quality decision support. A version of that is also what we need to improve the quality of our models and research and development in terms of how those systems work, and to calibrate and validate new tools. It's also what certification programs and outcome-based incentive programs are looking at to rely on in an aggregated way, and likewise now environmental service markets. So when we're looking at driving down the cost of, say, you hear about MRV, or measurement, reporting, and verification, to the extent that we can stack the costs into agronomic function, we can really drive down the cost through improved management planning at the field level. But it really requires entering data once and using it many times. And I'll just add a little later that it also requires trust. And so that data has value, and it increases with the more people using it. So I'll touch on that in a little bit, why I think that's so important for moving both the research forward, but also the improving the pace of improved soil health outcomes. So we heard a bit of different previous speakers about both direct measurement and proximal sensing, and a little bit of reference in terms of remote sensing. A lot of what we're working on with OpenTeam is to try to bridge those scales and drive down the cost by using the strengths and weaknesses of each of those approaches. From geospatial, looking at soil maps and remote sensing, yield maps at the landscape level, down to data synthesis at the ecosystem model, to bringing those together to help with stratification or sample site selection. How do we use the best landscape knowledge to strategically choose the best sites on the landscape to sample? And so bridging those, and that can incorporate a lot of the plant data that was that was mentioned earlier. And then likewise, there are other efficiencies in terms of harmonizing our in-field methodology and technology that inform one another, in terms of higher quality measurements with more consistent results that can be actually enforced through use of some new handheld tools, but also automated checklists and protocols that can gather the metadata to increase the confidence of that process. And then that process of sample handling, consistent and reducing error, can also improve the quality of our lab methods. So bringing that all together, I think, is a real opportunity to improve the quality and pace of research that is, again, when it comes to soil health, really requires on-site work to be applicable. I mean, we can draw broad conclusions from example sites, but ultimately the test is that it actually has to work on across the landscape, across our increasingly diverse production systems. And so that's, again, taking it from theory to practice, from this tech ecosystem into a networks of on-farm diverse production systems that are actively working and improving not only their soil health, but providing feedback into the tech ecosystem, and using a human-centered design process and social science around improving the quality of those tools. And so here, this is an example of some of the hubs and networks that we're working with within the OpenTeam ecosystem that are actively collaborating and building on some common platforms, so that we can both share our results and ask larger questions. So we can still ask our site-specific farm level questions, but then also identify those questions that we can best answer together, and be collecting data in a coordinated way to be able to share that effectively together. And so I mentioned earlier the importance of trust in this system, and also the enter data once, use it many times. And so we think that the really important way to gather data is actually in the form of decision support tools and certifications, where there's already a requirement to collect very high quality data, whether that's in a conservation activity ranking tool or organic certification, or when you're creating enterprise budgets on your farm, or doing a nutrient management plan or soil health, or making a grazing plan. All of that is collecting really high quality, high resolution data that can be put into use specific to that farm. Our work on the tech side is to be able to then create that data rather than shipping it off out to other agencies or other service providers, to have an ag data wallet that's controlled at the farm level. The farm then owns their data and controls that, and can then on a voluntary basis with conditional use agreements be able to aggregate that, so that whether a marketplace or a service provider or a technical can then actually group farms and draw conclusions across disparate operations. And so I think that's the exciting part when it comes to then being able to have data-driven story sharing at a peer-to-peer level, farmer to farmer. As we know, a lot of the peers for certain operations are not necessarily your neighbors. So having a way in which we can visualize that data for producers with the same quality that we're using the same underlying tools that we use as researchers. And then part of that is, again, creating user interfaces that make that easier, and making that part of this Creative Commons, shared tools, data structures, trust that enable us to ask these bigger questions and share data more seamlessly. I'll just mention some of our members and some of the tools that are out there in the field that are really at that ground level, sort of working at the subfield level and mapping at a high resolution, both soil textures and land cover, things like Land PKS, free and free app for mapping soils anywhere, not just in the US, but and also opportunities there where we're incorporating now the NRCS in-field assessments into Land PKS for basic soil health measures that both can be used for ranking, but we're actually collecting high resolution data from those observations that can be then fed into the larger system. And I'll mention again some of this mixing with direct measurement with now proximal sensing and low cost spectrometers. Yardstick is another example, but Quick Carbon is part of our current ecosystem. Again, mixing low cost hardware with public libraries, spectral libraries, and soil maps, and stratification to help guide sample site selection and sort of get the best of both remote sensing, proximal, and direct measurement. And these are questions, again, I think that can be best. An example there, I think, is
Dr. Cox, please wrap up. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
So an example of where we can bridge those technological those boundaries from the experiential and direct measurement in the field, handheld devices, remote sensing, and pull that all together in order to make better decisions and get the most out of our available tools and technologies. Thank you.
Thank you all for your excellent presentations on tools and technologies that are available for soil health and precision ag. We have only 2 minutes left. Let's ask 2 questions. One, let's look at the first one. For Dr. Soman, is lack of broadband going to restrict this technology to areas where broadband is unavailable?
No, so the robots don't actually use any internet connectivity when they are running in the field. So they do all the autonomy on board, real time. The data analysis currently happens on the servers, but we are rapidly moving it towards like either on-robot data analysis or like a field edge computer that can do the data analysis. So,
thank you. This question is to Dr. Owens. Are there any detailed resources related to the work that you presented to assist others in performing similar analysis?
The only thing that I know of is Advantage Acre through AgReliant worked with me when I was a faculty at Purdue, and they took my work and made it available. They do charge for it. As far as anything freely available, I'm not aware of it, but we are working to create a nationwide system for this. And hopefully in a couple of years, you'll see that as free.
Thank you. So let's do one more question. This is for all three of you. Is anyone able to comment on affordable, practical, low-cost use of UAVs to monitor vegetation on ridgeland and farmland?
Well, I can say my experience, it seems to be an excellent tool for scouting. So if you send it out to explore your field over areas you can't see, I think it's been very good. The one thing is we found drone from a multi-spec camera or other cameras, it's pretty messy. It takes a lot of pre-processing. And I think also you need some time series measurements from drones, but that's my opinion. The others may have other opinions.
Yeah, I think for a quick visual analysis, like, to take a look and make a human judgment, drones are a great tool. When you try to start to quantify it, it becomes pretty messy pretty quickly. Yeah.
And let's say a big thank you to our excellent presenters, and thank you to our audience, and thank you for submitting your questions. For those questions that are not answered during this session, we're gonna answer your questions. You will receive the answers through email. It's time for us to wrap up. Thank you again. Yeah, hope see you again.